Today we're going to be looking at sustainable cities. Before we go any further, see if you can come up with definitions for environmentally, socially and economically sustainable. The end of each definition might be the same. After you've done that, create a spider diagram of the strategies you can think of for sustainable urban living. This could just be a list of the things that you would want to change, or even better, it could be a list of the things that you would actually do. Our example of a sustainable city is Freiburg. Freiburg is in southwestern Germany, close to the border with France. And in the 1970s, it set out to become an extremely sustainable city. Many people think that it's achieved that. Freiburg's a relatively small city, and you might argue that that makes it easier than it might be for a medium-sized city like Sheffield or a large city like London. Still, we can learn a lot from what it's done. The main thing that Freiburg tried to change was transport, and it came up with a 5-pillar plan to look at traffic calming, concentrating traffic, controlling parking, public transport, and increasing bicycle use. There should be two sides to any strategy to reduce car use in an urban area. The first is to make car use less convenient and more expensive. Here you could increase parking charges, or you could narrow roads or reduce the number of car parks, for example. However, this won't work on its own unless you also make the alternatives more convenient and less expensive. The first pillar, traffic calming for Freiburg, concentrated on making cars move more slowly. They pedestrianised the city centre, as much of Sheffield is pedestrianised today. They put cobbles on the streets, which made the ride uncomfortable if you went over a certain speed, so it naturally slowed the traffic down. And in residential areas, they reduced the speed limit to 30 kilometres per hour. 30 kilometres per hour is about 20 miles per hour. Pillar 2 was about concentrating traffic in certain areas, and by doing so, keeping it away from other areas. They made sure that traffic used the main roads and were kept away from areas like the city centre and some of the more scenic locations which people like to walk around. Pillar 3 was about limiting parking. You can't completely get away with parking because people do sometimes need to take their cars into the city centre, for example, to pick things up. So you did need to have some parking, but by limiting it, it meant that people would think twice about taking their car into the city and look for alternatives. What they also did is make the parking towards the outskirts of the city cheaper than that towards the centre, and that encouraged people to use park and ride schemes, for example. Pillar 4 was about public transport. First of all, they have a tram system, a bit like Sheffield, and they've added new routes to it. But also, they made that transport quite cheap for people, so that it was a financially sensible decision to make over driving a car and paying for parking. And then the 5th pillar was about bicycle use. The city actively promotes the use of bicycles with over 500 kilometres of bicycle lanes, for example. They also provide safe and secure parking for bikes in the city centre. Many junctions have actually made bicycles a priority. When the lights change, bicycles are allowed to go first before cars are then released. So was it successful? Well, between 1967 and 1997, there was a drop in the number of cars being used on the roads. It fell from 63% to 40%. The 4,000 fewer cars that were found in the city centre each day reduced pollution in the city centre. And this was despite the population of the city increasing during that time. 70% of local journeys are now made using trams, which has massively reduced the amount of air pollution, as trams use electricity which doesn't generate any air pollution locally. And 3,000 kilometres of public transport lines have been created. Pause the recording now and watch the video at the link at the bottom of this slide. You might want to make some notes as you'll be using those notes later to answer a question. I'd like you to create a diagram similar to this one, where you explore how Freiburg reduced its transport problem. First of all, in the left-hand box, I'd like you to say what the problem was, briefly, no more than 3 points. Then I'd like you to have a look at how they made car use less convenient and more expensive. Again, just bullet points, 2 or 3. How they made public transport more convenient and less expensive in the middle box. And then in the bottom box, how they made cycling more convenient. And then the final box on the right hand side of your flow diagram will look at the outcomes. Did it work? Use a couple of statistics. You don't want too much in each box because you're going to be able to use this to actually create a paragraph of writing. If there's too much, it'll just get confusing. One of the key things that Freiburg did is to make cycling easy. There are lots of benefits of cycling. I'd like you to just briefly record the social benefits of cycling, the economic benefits of cycling, and the environmental benefits of cycling over using the car, for example. Then I'd like you to think about your own city. Sheffield bills itself as the outdoor city, and there are a huge number of cyclists in the city. But what is it, do you think, that prevents more people cycling to work in Sheffield? There's another video to watch at this point. Vauban is a district of Freiburg. I'd like you to pause this recording here and watch the video and again make notes, particularly about energy usage in Freiburg. So, how did Freiburg try to create clean electricity? What strategies did it use? You don't need to remember every single one, but 2 or 3 would be good. And how did it try to reduce electricity use in the city? So again, was Freiburg successful? Well, Freiburg produces 10 million kilowatts of electricity per year through solar power. That's quite a large amount. However, it's only a small percentage of the amount of electricity they use in the whole city. Their aim by 2050 is to produce 100% of their energy in this way, or at least through various renewable sources. But at the moment, it's closer to 10%, so there's quite a long way to go. And some people in Freiburg have found it expensive to become more sustainable. Here's the sort of question you might get on this topic. To what extent is it possible for cities to become environmentally sustainable? Use an example in your answer. Of course, you've got the examples of Freiburg and Sheffield. Those are your 2 main cities, although you could also bring in something from Rio if you felt it was appropriate. Freiburg, of course, is usually used as our positive example to support the idea that it is possible to become more environmentally sustainable. Sheffield has done some things to become environmentally sustainable, but actually it ranks somewhere near the middle of UK cities when ranked in terms of its environmental sustainability, even though it bills itself as being the greenest city in Europe. So Sheffield could be used as an example of how it's difficult to become environmentally sustainable, perhaps. You can use the caboodle book as well to plan out your answer. The important thing, though, is when you actually start writing your answer after that planning phase, you give yourself between about 10 and 12 minutes because this is a 9-mark answer. Have a look at your answer now. Do you have the following aspects in it, and are they clear? First of all, do you have an introduction in which you say to what extent environmental sustainability is possible for cities? You don't need to give any reasons here, you simply need to give a basic answer. For example, I think that it is totally possible for cities to become environmentally sustainable, or I think it is impossible for cities to become environmentally sustainable. Hopefully, you've gone for something in the middle, which allows your answer to have a little bit more balance. Then, as a new paragraph, you should put in your first idea. Perhaps this idea is about sustainable transport solutions. You should make sure you make your point and then expand and explain that point, adding evidence and any geographical ideas or theories that you might have. So here you could be looking at the successes of a city like Freiburg, and you could be comparing those with the challenges that a city like Sheffield might have, for example. Then you need something similar as a third paragraph for your second idea. Perhaps here you might look at sustainable energy use in the city. And then, if you've got time, a third idea maybe. Then you need a clear conclusion. And in that conclusion, you need to say which idea is strongest. So here I don't mean which idea from your paragraphs, but which idea as in, is it possible or is it not possible to become environmentally sustainable? If you feel that the answer is that it's more possible to become environmentally sustainable, you need to say why those arguments make you think that. And if you think it's less possible, then you need to say what arguments you're going to use to support that idea.